Hi, I'm Kristen Zook, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my special education interviews. I interviewed three people. Interviewed a principal who is at a large high school in the area, and then I also interviewed a special education teacher and a paraprofessional. They have all been in education in their positions for many years, right around 10 to 15, each one of them. So this was a really interesting thing for me to do. I learned a lot. First of all, the child find procedures, I don't know if it was just the wording or what, but I felt like all three of them needed like some clarification and to talk through what I was really asking. So I felt like that was really interesting. The principal stated that they use SIT process within the MTSS guidelines to identify, and that all three of these people have worked only at the high school level. And they all mentioned that by high school, although there are definitely students that need that are going to need some supports and things like that, a lot of them have been identified before they get there. And so the procedures are mostly identified within general education, and then they go through the process of identifying those students. And that in the principal's district, the screening of children between the ages of 3 to 5 is really important. That's where they kind of target trying to find the early interventions. And actually, Sean, special ed teacher, said the same thing, that the SIT process within MTSS is how they typically proceed. And it's really heavily focused on early childhood identification and intervention. And that the district offers screenings bi-monthly for children before they reach the ages of like kindergarten. And once they're in kindergarten and in the schools, that they then would go through the general education intervention in that process. And also with that early childhood identification, they do have parents as teachers as part of the support for that, and then those screenings. And then Bridget, our paraprofessional, was really unsure. She really did not know about that process. Some challenges. Chris talked about the lack of highly qualified teachers specific to special education, whether that was even with like the gifted teachers or any of them, anybody working with special needs students. He said it was hard to find highly qualified teachers right now, and also difficult to find paraprofessionals. And the other thing was, he said it was difficult finding appropriate instructional resources, like at the point of instruction, that are specific to the needs of the students, so that they're still challenged appropriately, they're still learning the standards that they need to learn, but in a way that's specific for them. And that typically what's been happening is that just remediating what everybody else is doing, and that is not always the best thing, that we need to find appropriate resources, and that's actually a struggle, because you first have to try to explain the need to the appropriate people. Sean said that really for her, it's like more of a big picture, that people often don't understand special education. And so they don't really know what the teacher is doing for those students and what they can and can't do. And so oftentimes they just really don't find out more information, and they don't interact a lot because they're really unsure of that whole process. Bridget said that really for her, the difficulty is when she is working with different teachers in different settings year after year after year, because it's hard to make those connections with everybody and to learn the students and to learn the way that the teacher operates and what support she can provide year after year when there's always those changes that are going on. They all talked about really rewarding things that are occurring. Chris stated that he really enjoys providing access for students to learning, that his role of making sure that students can, as much as he's able, can have the things that they need to be successful, and that he really likes when the special education students are recognized by their peers as being equals. They're communicated with, they're involved in things, they're accepted, they're recognized for the things that they do just as much as other people, and that he really enjoys that. Sean talked about when students succeed in a way that nobody ever thought that they would, even their parents sometimes, that it's really neat to watch that success, as everybody does with all of our students, but it's always really special when it's something that there's nobody thought they'd be able to do. And also she addressed the fact that having parents kind of let go and trust you to make those kinds of decisions for their student, to spend time with their student every day, and that you can work with them enough to maybe carry over some of those things so that they can happen at home too, to help that child be successful, not just when they're here, but in all situations. And that when working with the other teachers in the building, when they start to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and they're watching students be successful, how rewarding that is, because then they'll carry that over to their other students that they have as well. Bridget talked about how the independence of students, because she works, very closely one-on-one with those kids, and that when pretty soon they can do things on their own that she was doing for them before, that's really rewarding, because she feels like she's really made a difference with that student. Knowing that she had a role with that is just really rewarding for her. Advice on the supervision of staff. Chris stated communication, being able to communicate regularly, having open communication, honest communication, building those relationships with all the members of the staff from a leadership perspective is really important. Having a presence, making sure that you're at meetings, making sure that you are communicating and understanding what's going on when they're working with their students and knowing who the students are. Being engaged in IEPs, not just to show up for them, but knowing what that student needs, and providing an expectation that all the staff are involved, that they know the process, that they know what students need, that they familiarize themselves with that. And then a big one is providing appropriate training to everybody involved. Once the need's recognized, that finding a way to provide for them what they need to be supportive. Sean said flexibility and patience. She's a special education teacher and also has been the department chair for years of the special education department. And so things change a lot. That if someone's sick, if someone, that there are still needs that need to be met on that day. So being very flexible and very patient with what happens, because you never know what's going to happen. And making sure that your staff understands that as well. And then Bridget said training is key, that she really felt like she didn't get a lot of training on the job at all. And so knowing kind of in the building, like here's how things are run, what are the expectations, how do we do specific things, training on more like special education laws and things like that to know the big picture, but then also just specifics on procedures and routines in the building, she said would be really, really helpful. As far as working effectively with parents of special needs children, again, Chris stated communication and taking time to think about the school activities that are planned and things that you maybe wouldn't need to think about with the regular education students, but what are some special needs that need to be thought about if we're going to do this activity? Are there things that need to be communicated to parents ahead of time? Are there things that we need to think of to make sure it's accessible to all of our students? He said communicating progress, looking at things like draft IEPs prior to the meetings, including parents in the decision making and realizing that they do know their student and allowing them to have a voice rather than going in saying that you always know what's best, but letting them feel a part of that process, building that trust, and also making sure you take time to acknowledge and celebrate growth and things that have gone very well for the student. Sean said a lot of the same things, like getting to know the children, because it's going to be really obvious to parents if they show up to a meeting and you really don't know their child very well and you're trying to recommend things. Being able to coherently speak about their abilities, their needs, and their progress speaking in language and in things that's appropriate with parents, not using always education language. And realizing that parents are going to be at different places, that this is really hard for them. This is a struggle for them because it's very personal. And meeting them where they are and showing them what their student can do and providing that hope, the hope for those parents. And then Bridget basically said they don't really interact with parents very much, that's not something that they're supposed to do. So she didn't have a lot to say about that. Working with the regular education teachers. That's something Chris said, first of all, valuing their input rather than always making it something that they're being told they're going to do, making sure that they also can kind of have some input on what that might look like in their class. But do require them to be engaged. They need to know their students. They need to know which students have IEPs, what that means, the students' abilities, what they may need support with, those different kinds of things. And then building capacity. So maybe the teachers are willing to do more, but they need some training. They need some help being able to recognize what it is those students need. So making sure they have the training that they need, and then also celebrating success with those teachers. Sean talked about, again, being patient, explaining what you're doing, because for special ed teachers, this is what they do every day. But for the regular education teachers, they maybe do not recognize or understand why that's a need. And so taking time to explain it, why the student needs this and how that's going to help them would be really helpful. And Bridget actually talked a lot about, in her role, what she does when she's working with regular ed teachers, making sure she's looked at the IEPs, that she knows who the case managers are for the students, in case she needs extra support, she knows where to go. Making sure that when she's in that classroom, she and the regular education teacher are all on the same page in terms of her role in the class, so that she's providing the appropriate support. And then anything she can do to help with the alternate settings, helping with any kind of accommodations, and in what she would be doing with all students, that she wants to be there to make it a good environment. Advice for first year administrators. Chris said, make sure you listen, learning what's going on in the building, learning why things are the way that they are, first, and then asking questions, because that's how people learn, and not being afraid to say that maybe you don't know something rather than saying the wrong things that could be a problem. So being sure to learn as much as you can, and then not being afraid to mention that you might not know things, and building relationships within the building and using every resource that's available. Know what your resources are and then learn how to use those. And Sean talked about, again, learning as much about special education as you can prior to, so that you can actually help. Go to the IEP meetings, know how they work, know what's involved. If you're at a high school, we have department chairs for each of the departments, including special education. So get to know that person really well, because you're going to be working closely. Bridget said, really be friendly, be approachable, and be flexible, so that people feel comfortable coming to you if they have a question or concern, and building that relationship. Role of special education teacher and building principal, both need to be removing barriers so that students can be successful, whatever those may be. Make sure we're following law and policy, and both of those roles need to be providing support for the whole process. Sean said making sure that you have a good relationship, and that it's different maybe than with a regular education teacher, because you're going to be talking about specific student situations frequently. And Bridget said that both just need to know and do what's best for students. Characteristics, willingness to learn and grow, because you don't get your job knowing everything already. So being willing to know that you don't, and growing, acknowledging your limitations, and being committed to providing access. Sean said much the same thing, being willing to listen, learn, ask questions. And she said, all of her years, that most administrators are not trained in the details of special education. And so recognizing that, and again, with Bridget, just being flexible and approachable. is most important.